Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. Apologies for the delay today. We were having some slight technical difficulties, but we're here and we're ready to learn about some tide pools today. My name is Connolly. I'm a member of our education department here. And during this program, right now we are live from Long Beach. It is 2:10 p.m. On Thursday, May 8th. Thank you, Talia. I am joined in the studio with my friend Talia, who is controlling all this magic behind me, as well as monitoring our text and our email line. So if you're watching alongside us live, you can use that phone number on the top to text us, 562-286-1838. We love to hear any questions you have, observations, things you want to share. It's an interactive program. Please let us know what you'd like to hear about or have questions answered. And if you're watching at a later time and you still want to share something, that's awesome. We love to hear those things too. You can just shoot us an email using that bottom email address, which is going to be live@lbaop.org. Someone from our education team will be able to get back to you and answer that question or say thanks for the observation. So either way, we would love to have you join us during our program today. All right. So, like I mentioned, today we're going to be learning about tide pools together. And during our little talk today, our lesson about tide pools, we're going to be doing lots of things like making observations and asking questions, practicing some of those scientific skills. So the first thing I want us to do is to kind of warm up our brains a little bit and practice making those observations and noticing things. Talia is going to pull up what a tide pool habitat looks like. And I want us to kind of make some initial observations. Have you ever been to a tide pool before? Maybe you kind of have some familiarity with it. You kind of know maybe what it looks like or what the habitat is like, maybe animals you could find there. But if you haven't, that's cool. We'll be able to see maybe a video or a picture of what a tide pool looks like. Oh, here's a great one. We're going to fly right over it. Thank you very much, Talia. So I want us to take a second here and kind of just notice. Where does it seem like the tide pools might be? What kind of habitat are we looking at? What kind of things are you noticing? So take a few seconds here. If you want to text us in that observation, we're happy to hear from you. If you want to just share with someone else in the room, that's always cool too. Or just keep it in your mind and have that observation ready. I know that for me, the first thing I'm noticing is that we're not like in the middle of the ocean, are we? We're kind of at the shore, right? We're kind of where the land and the water are meeting. So that tells me a couple of things. First of all, that we're getting waves that are coming in and out, right? We have the tide that comes in and gets higher at certain points of the day, and then it also goes out and gets lower, right? So the water is kind of moving. It's not in the same place always. And it's also probably pretty shallow, right? Because some of these areas are just kind of on the beach, not super deep or not super far out in the ocean. So it's kind of a shallower habitat. Maybe we might find some smaller animals, right? Because maybe a really big like whale or shark wouldn't really be able to live in this habitat. There's not enough space for it. There's not enough water, right? So we might be seeing some smaller animals. We're going to have to see, they might have some special ways to help them survive since there's kind of so much happening with the water and the tides. And they're kind of accessible to us, right? You can actually go check out tide pools on our coast here. We got some locally here in Long Beach, and you can see what kind of animals you can find. So in our tide pool habitat, like I mentioned, right, we're seeing that water meeting the land. And specifically, I noticed it's very rocky in this area. So when we have little areas of rocks and kind of like little holes, things like that, and the tide comes in, right, it fills those up with water, and all sorts of little ocean animals can be in there. And then when the tide goes out, when it kind of lowers at a later point in the day, it either might leave some water in there or the water might go out with the tide. But some of those creatures can kind of hang out and actually survive outside of the water for a little bit. So it's a really interesting habitat that we're going to learn about today. Some of these animals are kind of hanging out outside of water for a bit, or they're used to this really like very strong waves that might come in and out. They might have some things to help them not get thrown around everywhere. So we're going to get to see some of these animals and some of their cool adaptations. Now, adaptation is a word that we use as scientists, and it just means something that an animal has on its body to help it survive. So if we think about ourselves as humans, right? I'm using my hands right now to help me talk, but I also use them to help me eat and open doors and type on the computer, right? All sorts of things like that. And so these animals we're going to see today, they're going to look a little different, but they still have adaptations that specifically help them survive in that tide pool habitat where the water is changing, maybe they're in the air sometimes, it's very rocky, they might have to hide in some little holes or caves or crevices. So let's check out what it might look like if we have a tide pool habitat. Now here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, we have a place you can actually visit and touch some of our tide pool animals called Coastal Corner. And Talia just put up a little clip here of what Coastal Corner looks like. So we're getting kind of a nice snapshot here of a bunch of different tide pool creatures all hanging out in one little tide pool here. So let's take a second and make some observations or notice any animals that you've seen before. Do you know the names of any of these animals? And if you don't, what do you notice? Do you see any familiar colors or shapes or something that might tell you a little more about this animal? I think that the one that sticks out the most to me, because it's a very obvious shape and its name comes from the shape of the animal, is all of these stars that we're seeing all over, right? So this animal is called a sea star. And these are a pretty common animal you can find hanging out in our tide pools. We can see there's a few different species just in this tide pool here in Coastal Corner alone. We have some ochre stars kind of over here, these little orangish, reddish ones. We also have some bat stars, like these little ones up here with their webbing in between their arms. We also have some giant spined sea stars over here that are pretty big and spiny, like their name would suggest. So let's see if we can take a closer look at any of these sea star species that we might find in a tide pool. All right, here we go. We've got a picture here of some of our bat stars. Now, what do you notice about our bat stars? What do you see? I mentioned that they have that name bat because they have webbing between their arms, right? Just like a bat does on their wing. So they're called bat stars. But what else do you notice aside from that webbing? Do they all seem to be the same color? No, right? I see lots of different colors. I'm seeing some orange, some pink, some purples. These are just the ones in this picture, but we actually have bat stars of basically every color of the rainbow. My favorite one up in Coastal Corner right now is like a bright blue color. So we got all sorts of different colors of sea stars. How does their body look? If you were to touch a sea star, how do you think it would feel? Would it be really squishy and smooth? Or do they kind of look like they have some texture on them? Yeah, I kind of see some texture too, right? I'm kind of noticing it almost looks like they're kind of scaly, right? They have kind of some little hard plates or scales on the outside of their body to protect them. And they have that to kind of protect them, but do they have bones inside their body? What do you think? They don't. So these kinds of animals, and a lot of the animals we'll see in our tide pool today, are called invertebrates, which means they don't have any bones in their body. So our sea stars don't have a skeleton or any bones in there. They've just got kind of that tough outside to protect them, but they don't have a skeleton like us. What else do we notice about these sea stars? I am noticing one star here that looks a little bit different from the rest. Do you think you can spot the sea star that looks a little different from the rest of them? It might have to do with the number of arms that we're seeing. How many do most of our sea stars have? Yeah, they have 5, right? Just like a star. They've got 5 arms. But I think I see one that has an extra arm. Let's see, take a few more seconds, see if you can spy the sea star that has an extra arm. All right, you ready? It is this one right over here. Did you notice that that one actually has 6 arms? So our sea stars can do this really cool thing called regeneration. Regeneration means that they can regrow an arm. So if something happens to it, like maybe they get injured or something, they're like, no problem, I can just grow it right back. So this sea star has 6 arms. Maybe something happened and it grew an extra one instead of just one, maybe it grew 2, or maybe it just grew an extra one from the beginning. But kind of interesting, right? Our sea stars are actually able to regrow those arms. Now, from looking at this picture, I noticed that they just look like a colorful star. And I don't really see any like organs or any other parts of their body. It seems like we're just looking at kind of like the top, that like kind of scaly, bumpy skin, right, that protects them. But I wonder what the bottom of a sea star looks like. What do you think the bottom of the sea star would look like? Here's a great picture that Talia put up for us. And we can see, we're seeing a totally different part of the star here, aren't we? So instead of that bumpy skin that was kind of all one texture, we can see underneath their arms, they have all these little lines of these little dots. What could those little dots be? What do you think? We're kind of getting a hint here because we're seeing the sea star stuck right up on the acrylic or the glass of the exhibit. So how is the sea star able to stick on there? What is it using? Yeah, it's using those little dots or circles, right? These are a part of the sea star that we call their tube feet. We call them tube feet because they're feet that are shaped like tubes. And these allow our sea star to stick onto stuff. Think of it kind of like a suction cup. And they also allow them to move around. So think of these as like a bunch of little feet, almost like a little millipede or something. And they can move all of them just like that together. So they can glide along the bottom of the ocean floor, right? So from the top, it looks like they're somehow just magically kind of flying like a little magic carpet or something, but they're moving all those little tube feet to allow them to take little tiny bitty steps just like that. Now, here's a great video of our tube feet. Now they can also use those tube feet to help them eat. And if we notice, you can kind of see it here in this video, right over here, where all of the arms meet, right in the middle of our sea star, is their mouth. And sea stars do something really crazy to eat their food. They use those tube feet to walk over on top of their food. And once they've got it right in the middle there, instead of putting it in their body and chewing up their food and eating it like that, they spit their stomach outside of their body, digest all of their food outside of their body, and then bring it all back in, slurp it up like that. Imagine if every time you had to eat your dinner, you had to get your stomach out, and on your plate you're digesting all your food and then you're bringing it back in. It's a totally different way to eat, and it's a pretty crazy adaptation. All right, so we've gotten to learn about one of our tide pool friends, our sea star. Let's see what else we might find in a tide pool. I wonder if there's one that might be kind of squishy and maybe has some tentacles or something that might feel almost sticky if you touched it. Do we have an animal like that, Talia, that we could check out? Oh, here is a great picture of a sea anemone. Now, a sea anemone is going to be a little bit different from our sea stars in that if you notice down here, we can see this really big, what we call their foot. So our sea anemones, instead of moving around like our sea stars do, although they can kind of stick to a rock, our sea anemones for the most part are just staying in one spot. So they're sticking onto something with that big foot, and then they have all these big tentacles around that stick out and allow them to catch their food. So if you were an anemone, you had all these tentacles out, right? And if some food swam by, you'd be able to grab it and bring it into your mouth. Now, where is the mouth on the sea anemone? Do you think you see it anywhere? It's not on the bottom because that was the foot. And if they're grabbing their food with the tentacles, it's probably near the tentacles so they can get their food from their tentacles into their mouth. Yeah, it's this circle right in the middle right there. That little opening is their mouth. So our anemones actually have some stinging cells on those tentacles, and they're stinging their food and being able to catch it that way and bringing it into their mouth. So if we head back to that clip of Coastal Corner, I think we might be able to see a few different types of anemones, but also they kind of look like they're doing different things. Some of them are nice and open like this picture. But then some of them, once they get their food, they will close up. And you actually won't be able to see those tentacles anymore. They'll almost just look like a little ball, and you can just see that big squishy foot as they are eating their food. I think there's a good example right here of this one. That one doesn't even look like a sea anemone, right? Because where did all those tentacles go? But they're inside. They kind of tucked all their tentacles in just like this to finish eating their food. And that's why if you ever come visit the Aquarium in the Pacific or another aquarium and you touch a sea anemone, you'll notice that they feel kind of sticky. you're feeling that weak sting, but for us as humans, our skin's too thick, it doesn't hurt us, it just kind of feels sticky. That's pretty cool, huh? Another adaptation that allows them to grab their food in those tide pools. And you'll often notice if you go to a tide pool at low tide where the water has gone out and a lot of these animals are hanging out kind of exposed to the air, most of the anemones that you see will look just like this one that's closed up. And that's because that way they can kind of hold on to all that moisture in their body and they're kind of waiting out the tide. So they're keeping their body nice and wet to survive. And then when the tide comes back in, they're like, oh, okay, I can relax, I can chill again, I can breathe, I'm all good. And they'll open back up with their tentacles. So if you want to see a sea anemone and be able to touch those tentacles, you have to find one that's under the water and ready to eat some food. All right, I think we have time for perhaps one more animal in our tide pool to check out. There is one in this picture, but you might have to look a little closely. I think I see it on the very edge of the picture. It looks like one of our sea stars is almost wearing it as a hat. It looks kind of spiky and kind of purpley. Do you see the animal I'm talking about? Here's a great picture of it. This is a purple sea urchin. Have you ever seen these before at a tide pool or at the beach? Did you even know that it was an animal? If you look closely at it, you'll notice that they actually move all of their spines, and they also have tube feet just like our sea stars. So if you see one that's hanging out, try and look closely and see if you can see our urchin moving its spines around, moving its tube feet, trying to figure out what's going on, maybe looking for some food. But this is indeed another animal. Now, here in this picture, we can see our sea urchin with one of its favorite foods, which is some kelp. But again, I don't really see a mouth on this animal. Where do you think it could be? And I'll give you a hint. This is an animal kind of similar to our sea star. They're both members of a phylum called echinoderms, which means they've got spiky skin. So if we think about where our sea star's mouth was, maybe that will give us a hint about where the sea urchin's mouth could be. So let's think back to our sea star. Where was the sea star's mouth? Because the top was really spiky, just like the urchin. And I think, oh, that's right, it was on the bottom. Thanks for reminding me, scientists. So our sea star's mouth was underneath, right in the middle, right in the middle of all those arms. So maybe our sea urchin's mouth is in the same place. And that would kind of make sense, right? We can see our urchin here kind of sitting on top of this piece of kelp. And if that's where their mouth is, then they would be able to be enjoying this nice little snack. And in fact, that is where our sea urchin's mouth is. And they have, oh, we're getting a great look of it here. Thank you, Talia. They have what is called an Aristotle's lantern. And it's kind of these little pieces of their mouth that like form together, 4 little pieces like that. And they can use it to eat that algae, to eat that kelp, kind of scrape away little pieces like that. And you can see it's right in the middle here between all of those spines and tube feet. The tube feet are the ones that have those little dots. We can see they're almost like little suction cups. So right in the middle there is our sea urchin's mouth, and it will move right on top of that kelp to eat it, just like our sea star would have to do to eat a piece of shrimp or a clam or something like that. All right, awesome. So we learned a little bit about some of our tide pool friends today. We thought about the challenges of living in a tide pool and how in an environment where the water's coming in and leaving, you got to have some interesting adaptations. You have to be able to maybe hold on to that moisture in your body or be able to be in the air for a little bit and survive. And then once the water comes back in, you're all set to go again. So that's going to bring us to the end of our program today. But I want to say thank you so much for joining me today, my scientists, and learning with me about tide pools. If you want to join us at 3 o'clock, we're going to be going on a really cool virtual whale watch. So be sure to check that one out. Once again, if you have any questions or comments, observations you want to share, you can text us at that phone number, 562-286-1838, or you can email your questions to live@lbaop.org. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.